Welcome back, Wonders. It's Naidra. So I must say that Path of Exile 2 has been so much fun to play. I've been having a really great time with it, and it's been consuming pretty much my entire day, most of my days. But I also will say that there are some challenges in this game that are really, really difficult. One of those being the Ascendancy Trials in specific. Not only are they terribly difficult to complete, but on top of that, they're extremely long. And what makes it worse is after spending so much time going through and doing it, if you're not able to complete it, it just starts you right at the very beginning, which is really, really difficult and extremely frustrating. And so for today's video, I wanted to bring to you guys a build that I've been having a lot of fun playing with, especially in the early endgame portion of it. I have seen quite a few different variants of this build, which is the Spark Stormweaver build out there. I think most of them are really great and really fun to play. The one that I'm using is not very gear intensive. I am only using one unique, and until actually today, I wasn't using that either. So you definitely can use this build with just rare items, and it should be pretty easy to put together. And on top of all of that, it really doesn't require too much skill to do just because you're constantly pretty much spamming one attack. So with that said, let me show you what this build looks like and how it works. And then as usual, we'll take a look at the gear, and we'll also take a look at the passive skill tree and all of that other good stuff as well. So first off, the different skills that we're going to be using for this build is obviously going to be Spark, where we're going to be spamming that pretty frequently. We're going to use Conductivity to allow us to reduce the enemy's resistances, which is going to allow us to do that much more damage. And then we're also going to be using Mana Tempest pretty frequently. This allows us to do significantly more damage, but it is also going to burn through your mana a little bit faster. So this isn't going to be that sustainable, but typically this is something that I use when I'm either at a distance or when I'm facing against bosses. This is really how you're going to be able to do a majority of your damage. So this is really good. The other thing we're using here is Orb of Storms. We're casting this as frequently as we can. And then we're also going to be using Flame Wall, which is just going to help us add that much more damage on top of everything else that we're doing with Spark. We are going to have Lightning Warp on our bar, but currently we're not using it very frequently, but it is there so that it can help with the teleportation and also with some mana regen. And then lastly, while we're not using this frequently at all, if you're finding yourself stuck or in a position where you just can't get away from monsters, you can cast Frostwall to blockade them away from you and then buy you enough time to be able to start attacking and to start spamming. As you go into the higher mapping tiers, you are going to find that monsters do get pretty quick and it's a little bit harder to avoid them. So this is just an extra tool to help you out with that. And then we do have Chaos Bolt on our bar, but we're not using this at all. This actually just popped up on here because of a one that I swapped out earlier today. The idea is to use Conductivity to reduce their resistances first. We'll cast Mana Tempest, and then really we'll start spamming Spark. In the situation where you're fighting against a rare monster or somebody more powerful, that's really when you'll start using things like Orb of Storms and Flame Wall, but otherwise you only really should primarily just be using Spark, Conductivity, and also Mana Tempest. So let's take a look and see what that's going to look like in battle. All right, so it looks like we got a couple of monsters here. I was hoping we can find a group, but first we're going to go ahead and use Conductivity so we can curse them, and then we'll throw on our Mana Tempest, and we'll start spamming away at Spark. As you can see, they're going down pretty quick, and a lot of times you'll even see that monsters are going to start going down before you even get to them 5 screens away, just because the Spark attack is a very wide-ranged attack that basically will attack everything in your screen. So if you're comparing this to a Diablo build, this is going to be similar to the Lightning Spear build, where you're just basically spamming, but you don't really have to worry very much about aiming, as everything on your screen is going to get hit. And so we'll give that another test and see if we can find another group here, but super easy to do. All right, so Conductivity, and we can just use Spark. In the case where we feel like we need more damage, Mana Tempest should be able to wipe everything out really quickly. You'll notice that unless we have Mana Tempest on, we really don't run out of mana very often. Chance Shard, let's take that. But it does run out pretty quickly when you are using that Mana Tempest. So if you have a high mana generation rate, that's really going to help you out a lot. It's going to help you get back on track right after you step away from Mana Tempest. But again, really powerful build, really easy to use, and it's low risk, so you're not having to get too close to monsters. And as you're going into those higher mapping tiers, that's definitely something that you're going to want to have, because while we do have some energy shield and we got a decent amount of life, if you get hit, this is still a pretty squishy build, so you're going to want to try to keep your distance if possible, but otherwise there really shouldn't be anything you can't take down. The only time this build I've noticed struggles a little bit more is if you're going up against monsters that are just really fast and you just can't get away from them, and again, that's when we want to use something like Frostwall to block them off, so that way we can focus on attacking and also using our Mana Tempest, Conductivity, and everything else as well. So really fun build to play, really easy to use. The only thing is we do want to make sure we have a good amount of mana, and also we want to make sure we've got some energy shields that we can tank those hits if we are getting hit, which again really shouldn't be happening very frequently as long as we're keeping our distance. So now that you know how this build works, let's go back to town and let's see what's making it happen. Alrighty, so first we'll start off with our gear. And as I mentioned, this is not a very gear intensive build, so this is something that you should be able to put together pretty quickly. If you do need any of these items, you should be able to get pretty much all of them for one exalted orb or even just orbs of augmentation by using the trade. By the way, that's something that I just recently discovered is you can go onto PoE's website and you can do all of the trading there. You can also trade things to other people and it's really easy to do and it's also really quick. So if you haven't started using the trade functionality, that is something that I highly recommend doing. It's going to make your life so much easier and you'll be able to get the gear you need without having to farm for it for hours. And again, most of the things that you'll find on this website are going to be about 1 to 3 exalted orbs, so they're pretty cheap. The only item that I've seen that's more expensive is the chest armor Temporalis, which it makes sense. It's a really good piece of equipment, which I'm looking for, but I've seen those are anywhere from 230 to 300 divine orbs. And at this point in the game, I've only gotten 1 divine orb, so I'm not quite there yet. But everything else and everything that we're using in this build, you can get for pretty cheap. So with that, we'll start off with our wand. Right now, we're just using a pretty simple wand. What we want to see on here is critical hit chance. If possible, we want to get some maximum mana on here as well. And of course, lightning damage, since this is a lightning build. But then the other thing that's good on here that's important is the 55% increased mana regeneration rate. This is what's going to allow us to continue spamming even just a couple of seconds after stepping away from our mana tempest. So it doesn't have to be this specifically, but something like this is absolutely going to work. Then we got our first ring. One of the things to point out on here, and one of the most important things that I'm finding about this game, is having increased rarity of items found. The more you have of this, the more likelihood of finding a good item is. And so if you can get this on your equipment, that's going to be one of the first things that you want to look for if possible. And then other than that, of course, this is a lightning build, so lightning damage is always good, but it's really important we've got some good evasion rating. We definitely need to have mana on almost every single piece of equipment. And then the other important thing on here is we want to have resistances to all elements or to any of the elements. I am struggling a little bit to maintain all of my resistances, but if you can, your rings are really definitely going to help you out with that. So this is what I'm currently using. Again, this is not the most optimized gear, so you can definitely find something that's better than this, but this is what I'm using. And I'm having a lot of fun in the early end game, and I've been able to do quite a bit of mapping with this as well. And then taking a look at our gloves, we've got 30% increased armor and evasion, which is great. We definitely need armor. We definitely need evasion. We don't need fire damage, so that's something that you absolutely can do without. But what's really helpful with this one specifically is the 140 to maximum mana. We need as much of that as possible. If we can be at 2k, that's going to be perfect. A little bit higher would be even better, but 2k would be right around where we want to be. We've also got some increased critical strike damage bonus. That's fine. It's not really needed, but that's fine. And then once again, we've got some cold resistance on here. If we can get some fire resistance, lightning resistance, just any res is going to be good. Next, this is the only unique item that we have and that we're currently using. This is really great for few different reasons. One of them is we are getting some maximum mana to this, so that's great, but we have another piece of equipment now that's giving us increased rarity of items found, and that's going to be extremely helpful for us. And then of course, gaining 25% of maximum life as extra maximum energy shield is huge. This gave me about 1,000 energy shield, and mine's still pretty low at 2,600 right now. I know people are getting up to 6+K with this, and so if we can get this closer to 5,000, that's really where we're going to get some of that survivability coming from, and this is what's going to allow us to get to those T15 maps. However, for now, I am still struggling with that a little bit, and that's mostly due to the fact that I'm still only level 72 right now. So once we get to a higher level, we can start using some higher level equipment, which is going to be really great. But this is definitely a piece of equipment that we're going to need on this build to make sure we get a little bit of tankiness from that energy shield. Next, we've got our armor. For our armor, we're getting evasion rating from this. We are also getting some energy shield. We're getting life, and we're getting some spirit from this, which is really helpful. And then we also are getting some fire resistance, but it's pretty low. So if you can get more resistance on here as well, that would be really helpful. The reason we are using this specifically is because of the spirit we're getting from this. The more spirit we have, the more buffs we can get as well. So this is going to be really helpful. In fact, if we can get more spirit than what we have right now, that would make it even better for us. But at this point, I'm just at the amount of spirit that I need to be able to have 2 buffs, and we'll go over the buffs in just a moment here as well. For the runes for this guy, we are using Mind Rune so we can get some additional max mana. And then we're also using the Iron Rune so we can get some additional armor, evasion, and energy shield as well. So you can choose what runes you want to put in here, but those are the ones that I'm finding to be most helpful with this, especially because, like I mentioned, this is still a little bit of a squishy build. So this is super helpful to have. Looking at our belt, this one's really good, especially because we're getting an additional charm slot from this. But on top of that, we're getting max life, we're getting some maximum mana. The only thing we're missing from here is some resistances, which would be really great. And then of course, if we can get some increased rarity of items found, would be really helpful with this too. But having the additional charm slot is really helpful because we can add things like thawing charm. Depending on the boss that we're fighting, we can have 2 different charms up at the same time, which is really helpful. And it also is really helpful in AoE situations as well. We really don't want to get stunned or frozen. Those are things that can be detrimental to our success. And so this is going to be really helpful. Again, still some area of opportunity with this for some resistances, but 2 charm slots are really good to have. Taking a look at our amulet, we currently have an amulet that gives us increased spell damage, which is great. We've got some life coming from this, 6% increased mana. We've got plus to all attributes, and we've got dual res going with this. So those are both really helpful. This is a really great amulet. We could do without the strength at the top, although we may need strength at a later point. But at this point in the game, this is super helpful. I do plan to swap this out once I get to level 78 for the Choir of the Storm Jade Amulet. This is really helpful because it's going to grant a level 18 Lightning Bolt. And secondly, it will automatically trigger Lightning Bolt on critical strike hits. So that's going to be super helpful. And on top of all of that, this will also ignore the enemy's lightning resistance when we're critting. And because of the different items we have on here, we should be at about 100 or more critical strike chance by the time we get to use this. So this is going to be super helpful to our DPS overall, and that's something I can't wait to start using. But until we get to level 78, we're going to continue using this one. Again, all of the different attributes on here are extremely helpful to have. Looking at our second ring, we've got an implicit modifier of plus 22 to our max mana. We want to have as much max mana as possible, so that's great. We definitely don't need the chaos damage, so we could do without that one. If we can get some lightning damage on here, would be really helpful. We've got 62 to life, 61 to mana, and then the only other thing that we really care about on this specifically is the 54% increased mana regeneration rate. So we have a really healthy mana regeneration rate. Like I mentioned, if we step away from our Mana Tempest while it's active, we can recover pretty much all of our mana within a couple of seconds. Looking at our boots, same thing here. We're using the Mind Rune as well. This is going to give us that plus 20 to maximum mana. The one critical thing to have on here is the increased movement speed. If you can get something with more than 20% would be extremely helpful, but that movement speed is what allows us to dodge and get away from enemy attacks, especially bosses. So really, really important to have that. That's the number one attribute we can have on here. The second one that we really want to have is the rarity of items found, but I don't have that one on here currently. But the evasion rating, the max mana is extremely helpful as well. So definitely don't mind having those things. If we can make any changes to this, it would be to add more increased movement speed and then potentially add some rarity of items found on here too. And then lastly, for our equipment, we are using the Dragon Refuge Focus. The benefit of having this is we're getting some maximum energy shield from this. We're getting some increased spell damage from this. The mana is great as well. I'd love to see more on here, but we are also getting some crit strike chance, which again, we want to try to be at about 100% crit strike chance with the build that we're working towards. We've got a little bit of resistance on here and then an additional 59% increased mana regeneration rate here too. Like I mentioned, the items that we're using for this are not fully optimized, but yet still super easy to get, which makes it easy for you to begin your endgame journey and start finding some of those really high ticketed priced items so that you can use in your endgame journey as well. Now, taking a look at our skills, we've got Spark as our main attack, so we want to try to add as many support gems as possible. Be sure to add additional quality to your Spark as well. Each time you increase the quality of your Spark, it's going to fire off additional projectiles as well. So this is going to be super helpful. It's going to help you put out a lot more DPS, and it's super simple to do that. Once you get your Gem Cutter's Prism, you can right click on it and then click on the skill here, and that'll allow you to increase the quality up to 20%. For the support gems we're using for this, we're using Considered Casting, We're also going to be using Arcane Tempo, and then Persistence, and then lastly, we're using Inspiration as well. I have not yet found a perfect Jeweler's Orb. I can't wait to do that, so I can add it onto here as well. In fact, I've only found one advanced Jeweler's Orb, but this is going to be the most important place that you can add the additional support gem. Next, we've got Conductivity, which we are pairing up with Focused Curse. And then, of course, Heightened Curse as well. And lastly, Hex Bloom. For our Mana Tempest, we are pairing it up with Premeditation. And then we've also added Energy Barrier to this. While Energy Barrier isn't absolutely necessary, it is something that I do recommend having. It is going to help you out. Well, you don't need to add a third socket for this. There really isn't anything in particular that is going to help us, at least not that I found so far. So we just need to have these two. Next, we've got Orb of Storms, which we're pairing up with Font of Mana. And then we're also going to use Conduction with this. And lastly, we're going to use Lightning Exposure as well. Next up, we're using Flame Wall. For Flame Wall, we just need Fortress and Spell Cascade. For Lightning Warp, we are using Soul Drain. I'm not using Lightning Warp very frequently right now, so it's up to you if you want to add any additional support gems to this. But for now, I find that Soul Drain is going to be the most helpful. For our Frost Wall, we are using Spell Echo. We're also using Frost Nexus, and we're lastly pairing it up with Ingenuity. And for our buffs, we are going to be using Mana Remnants. This is really helpful for us, and because of the amount of spirit we have, we are able to perfectly use both Mana Remnants and Archmage. For Mana Remnants, we are going to pair that up with Clarity. And then for our Archmage, we are pairing that up with Lightning Mastery so that we can get an additional +1 to all of our lightning skills. And for our passive skill tree, we are using a Stormweaver Ascendancy. We're going to veer over to the left and take Mana down to Constant Gale, carrying that down to Mana again, and finishing it up with Force of Will. And then for the actual tree itself, we're going to make our way over to the right and make sure that we grab Practice Signs, Raw Power, Open Mind, and also Pure Energy as we continue to make our way up to the right-hand side. We are going to grab Mana Blessing on the way before we start to curve over to the left, where we will stop at Essence Infusion. And then we'll continue to make our way over to the left. For all of these attributes, I have added intelligence to this, as you are going to need quite a bit of intelligence. But if you need anything else or have intelligence via your equipment, then you may want to take something else. It's up to you. And then we'll stop at Chronomancy before we make our way up to the next area, which will take us up to Heavy Buffer. And then we'll also grab this socketed node up here before we continue to make our way up to the top left, stopping at Calibration, and then moving on up to Breaking Point, All Natural, and Storm Charged as well. On the right hand side, we've got Dependable Ward, and of course we're going to be taking Touch of the Arcane as well. Now, I do plan to circle back eventually and also grab Mind Over Matter, which is going to help with our tankiness a little bit, but it also does reduce our mana recovery rate, so this can positively and negatively impact you, but it will help with tankiness overall, so this will be an important one to take. If you're finding that you can't survive at all right now, this may be the better way to go. However, I'm not having too many survival issues, and so with that, I've skipped over it for now, but I will be coming back to this at a later point. And then we'll start making our way over to the right, where we're going to hit Enhanced Barrier first. And then we'll continue to go over to the right, where we're going to take Power Conduction and also Electric Amplification. And then at my level, this is where it's going to stop, but we're going to continue to make our way over to the right, and we'll take Raw Mana for some additional maximum mana, although the cost of our skills is going to take 10% more mana, but we're getting an additional 12% overall, so it is going to be helpful. We'll then make our way down, where we are going to take Eldritch Battery, and then we'll come back up over, and we're going to go over to the right, where we'll end up to turn the clock forward. And then I will continue to update this as I continue to move forward as well. But if you're at my level or below, this is where it will leave us for now. So that's what our passive skill tree looks like. So that's all I have for you guys for today. Thank you guys so much for watching this video. If you guys like this video, please don't forget to like, subscribe, and comment below so I can continue making videos like this, and it would help me out so much. I also do plan on posting an updated version of this build sometime in the next week or two, so I'll post a 2.0 version once I've gotten to a higher level, and also potentially added on a couple of more uniques as well. So stay tuned for that. Until next time, Wonders.